And we're live. What's up, Benson Chan?
Oh, not much. I'm happy to be here. Excited. Glad to meet everyone and looking forward to this session here.
Yeah, well, you're an exciting person with some exciting ideas. You can probably go on for days with ideation. So that's I feel like what our relationship is. Your cat, by the way, wants to get out of there. If you want
I
to help
know. I
her
know.
him out.
Give me 1 second.
Sure, it's all part of the
Let me see.
podcast.
That's right.
Seeing the day in the life of an employer and
Yeah.
their cats.
No cats.
You okay? There you go.
Okay, there you go.
So
Okay.
we have some co-hosts here, alumni from 2018 and then 2019. And what's interesting is that both of you guys actually have smart city related projects, I would say, from your programs. So let's have you guys introduce yourself, a bit about your project, and why you are interested in Benson and strategy of things. I know, Nick, you were kind of contemplating doing SOT last year, right? So feel free to share some about that. Since Alec has seniority here, why don't you go first?
That's weird to think about, but I'm Alec. I joined the program my freshman year. I think it was 2018, right?
Yep.
2018 summer. That's when we were kind of based in 101 and also in the bank. But my project, I was with my co-founder Casey Brandt, who basically we worked together to develop a product which was a crosswalk system that used sensors instead of touch-based system. So instead of touching a button, you wouldn't and getting all those germs, you'd be able to kind of use it the same way that you would have like a paper towel dispenser in a bathroom. But basically, our freshman year, we went through that whole process of developing our product. And then sophomore year, we developed it a little more. And then most recently, we were success managers at PilotCity.
And what's the company name called again?
Auto Walk, all one word,
Ah,
double capitals on A and W.
great. Sounds
Yeah,
exciting.
and I think you also were able to get access to one of those gray utility boxes in San Rafael, right? Like I think they opened it up for you to kind of show you where it actually triggers the actual signaling of the walk sign and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, we had Don from he it was in Sausalito, and he has control, I believe, of all the Marin ones. But yeah, he helped us out a lot, and we're hoping that once we're kind of able to go into his office and potentially try to test our products. But it's just so difficult to kind of be with people, especially if you have immunocompromised like partners at this time. Um, but we really look forward to potentially testing that this summer and potentially try a pilot within Sausalito or potentially San Rafael.
And you also, I think Tony Battaglia was your pinup day reviewer, right? So he provided some advice in the early part of your program. Do you remember him, Alec?
I think so.
Okay, he was
Uh,
one of your pinup day reviewers. Benson and Tony, I think, know each other
Mhm.
somewhat well, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
familiar with each other. And I forgot there was another thing that you. It'll come back at some point. Let's have Nick introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
So hi, my name's Nicholas. I also joined my freshman year of the 2019 internship, and basically my project was the idea of an autonomous bus to take kids from Antioch High School to Deer Valley High School to help expand the learning curve for them due to the different academies at each school. And I really found this interesting, especially with the help with a like how to get a prototype, and especially with smart cities, how that could really affect in the next couple years with
Mhm.
self-driving vehicles.
That's right. Cool. So thanks for giving the introductions. Benson, let's talk some smart cities.
All right.
So I actually know you before you knew me. And it was actually, now that I think about it, it was Don Fregosa and Rich Fregosa who told me about you.
Yeah.
I think it was we were like Zocalo Coffee House in San Leandro, and we're talking about smart city stuff. And then Rich being a really supposedly a really great smart home expert, right? And
Right.
practitioner, was like, hey, you gotta really talk to these guys, Benson, and I think he mentioned Reynolds too. And that's when I first heard about it. I was like, strategy of things, strategy of things. That's such a weird name. It kind of it's just a funny name, right? Strategy of things, right? And I think that's just like a funny title. But that caught my eye, and then I saw, I think he may have connected us through email. He might have ghosted me, but
I don't think so.
okay. But then at some point, I think we got connected through the Global City Teams Challenge or of the likes, and then I was like, oh, you're Benson with strategy of things, right? So I think that's how we got connected in the first place.
Yeah, actually, it's talking about a small world. So after I left the smart home industry back in was it 2016? Because our company got acquired, but I knew Rich Fregosa from that industry. When I was in the industry, and so I went to a networking event out here in Berkeley, and I came across this. I think you had something. It was a little postcard size announcing some event over at the San Leandro's Zero Energy Center or something like that. And I looked at it. Oh, this sounds like a pretty interesting thing. And I looked at it. So, oh, yeah, maybe I should look more into it. And I think that's when I saw your name, and I mentioned, hey, Rich, you're in San Leandro, and Rich knows everybody, right? I say, hey, do you know this guy, Derek? He said, oh yeah, I'll make an introduction. And I don't know if that ever happened, because I don't think we actually met into the GCTC. But I remember I came across your name back then from that little postcard.
Oh, great. That's good to know. Now I don't feel bad.
Yeah, it's a small world, right?
Yeah. And so, we'll talk about GCTC perhaps along the way, but I'd first like to know your story, because you worked in corporate for a while to kind of get, and that's where you kind of landed for a good bit, I believe, right? And eventually then I guess segued into this kind of smart home industry, and then now you're in this kind of smart cities industry. So take us back as far as you'd like, and how you came to be here, and what your story is, and how you evolved the different variety of exciting industries. And love to know more about you too, and where you find your strengths, because you're a great strategist. And so, that's the name.
Yeah. Well, the history of strategy of things was, I'll start off by saying that great technologies don't always win in the marketplace. Right? It's great go to market, and so and that's the last half of my career has been in what I call the front end of the business, right? In business development and marketing and strategy. And when you're working in the front end, you kind of realize that it's those other things that allow the products you produce to be successful, right? And I've seen this throughout my career, just seeing that. And so when I started this company along with Renault, we struggle with, well, what should we name our company? And we said, let's just, since we're really interested in emerging technologies and Internet of Things, let's just leverage something from that. So we call ourselves Strategy of Things. And so it's a play off that. But when you mention strategy of things, people automatically now think, oh, IoT, right? Are you guys doing anything with IoT? Yes, we are, right? So it's just leveraging that name, that branding, and so we get a little bit of a lift from using that name, right? So from that perspective, that's how we kind of pick that name. If you get there, if you get into something early enough, you can buy up some of these domain names before everyone else figures it out, right? And we were fortunate that we got there early. Now, all that said, I've always been involved in innovation. Right? So my first job was actually at NASA Ames. I was a flight simulation engineer right out of college. And that kind of got me hooked in working things on the leading edge. And even being an aerospace engineering major, you kind of work things at a little bit more in the leading edge. And so that's kind of got my taste for working some of those things that are pretty cool that maybe people haven't really developed yet, and you're developing that knowledge every day, right? Because you're creating that knowledge. And then I got into And then from there, I got into satellites. So I was a satellite systems engineer for a few years. Work on some of the pretty cool communication satellites at that time. And they kind of evolved. I got into consulting for a little while into just when the internet was starting to really take off, right back in 2000. And so you kind of see all the new opportunities. So I got involved in that, and then ended up working for a startup company that was trying to ride off the internet craze, and that went pretty well. I think that was an early B2B type company, but they eventually got acquired. And then I ended up doing my own thing for about 5 years. And really, this is how can we bring in electronics from overseas, create our own brand, and then take it into the marketplace. Along the way, we kind of learned how you can compete in a crowded market, and you have to think a lot differently when you're competing against the big guys. And that was my first introduction into the idea of that the best technology doesn't win. It's really the best go-to-market would take you into the marketplace. And it was based on an article that we read in the Wall Street Journal, and at the time, it talks about the concept of product placement. So at the time, there were really the MP3 player. The top brand was a company called Creative, right? And this is when the Apple iPod was really starting to take off, right? And so Creative was the number one brand, but they've been out there before the iPod was. But then the number two brand in the marketplace was a company called SanDisk. And you're thinking, SanDisk, don't they make flash drives? I never heard of it. But how did they come out of nowhere to become the number two brand in MP3 players? And it came down to one very simple thing. They were already selling flash drives. So they said to the people at Staples or Best Buy, said, what if I were to take this MP3 player, which is really a flash drive with some buttons and a little screen on it, and I place it next to the flash drives. And when they did that, people were looking for flash drives. They say, "Oh, what's this?" They see this, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to buy this." And so they bought it. So it was all product placement. And so we kind of realized very quickly that even though that SanDisk didn't really do any marketing or advertising, just by having that sheer presence in a store allowed them to take off. Then you realize that the idea of having a go to market allows you to succeed. Right? And that's kind of where it started the wheels churning. So from there, after that experience, I ended up working at Cisco for about 8-9 years. I ran business development and marketing for one of their business units. I was also rotated in at the end there to help them create their version of Amazon Web Services for Cisco. And ultimately that didn't go anywhere because Cisco struggled with how do I change my business model into something that's very, very innovative that we weren't set up for. So after that experience, I joined the old boss of mine that was we worked together in consulting. He was my boss then. He founded a company called PackEdge. Is in the smart home industry, makes networking equipment at the very high end. So I ran business development, marketing, and strategy for him. And essentially, we got acquired about 3 years later. And that was from there, that was my introduction into IoT, the Internet of Things. And I've always had this theme of innovation running through. And when after the acquisition, after we helped them through the company getting merged, I wanted to do something a little different, a little bigger. And how can I leverage innovation? How can I leverage this Internet of Things to look at something different? Right? How can we? And one of the areas was smart cities. We said, smart cities is like a smart home, but on a massive scale. And here I am. Right? And 4 years later, here I am. But it's been an interesting journey. I think when we talk smart cities, people get very excited, but it's actually has its own set of challenges. It can be very innovative, but as we're seeing, sometimes innovation and the way cities operate don't always map together. Cities rely on they care about things like reliability. Right? They work on 20-year cycles, whereas innovation works on 1, 2, 3, 4-year cycles, right? And those don't always align. But when they do align, you get some pretty cool stuff. Right? So
Yeah. I want to before we get into the challenges of smart cities and innovation of cities in general, let's talk about your interest in innovation throughout your career. You know, it seems like that's been a thread that's connected the dots between it. And, you know, tell us about that path that you took. Like, when did you recognize that you were innovative or thinking outside the box and always was interested in new things and leading things? I think you mentioned aims, right? So how did you harness that along the way? And then, you know, how did you intentionally apply that skill set that you discovered about yourself into the organizations that you know, were applying that skill set to?
Yeah, you know, I think as engineers, we've always wanted to do some cool things, right? That's why I kind of let all of us into engineering, right? Why we want to do these things. But you know, when you go out in the working world, the reality is very different, right? You're working on some very established products or doing certain things that's been done, or you work on a small section of an airplane as opposed to an entire airplane. But that's, you know, but what kept me going on that was I was able to work on some pretty cool projects, and you just take those little things and you build on it. Now, why innovation? I think part of it is, yes, always been my interest in doing something cool and new, right? Because I'm one of those guys. If I have to work on something and it becomes and I do that over and over again, the same thing, then I probably go crazy. So I always make sure to try to change jobs, change projects every so often, right? So you don't get stuck on something too long, and you're always working on something fresh and new. And along the way, you get exposed to a lot more of these things. And what was interesting is when I got rotated into different assignments, especially early in my career in the aerospace industry, it was always interesting to bring in another view to a problem that people have been working on for the last year or a couple of years. Like you're bringing this outside view. And a lot of innovation is really that, is bringing in another way of looking at something, doing something that people might not have done before, whether there's a current project or whether it's something totally new. And that's part that always excited me, right? Is to work on this really cool stuff. And if I could then make that difference, then it's great, right? But I don't want to stay on it too long, because then it just becomes another job, right? So that's kind of how I always looked at innovation. It's working these things that I bring in another view. Sometimes there's not a easy solution to it, and so the I guess the constraints that you work against are no longer there, right? So it's like we just need to solve it. How can we do it? Right? And so you get a lot of creativity in doing some of those types of projects. Right? So to the extent that I could, I try to I try to work on those other projects like that.
And so at some point my life, people always kept telling me in the early days when I was like, a young, entrepreneur, 23 years old, trying to do things, people are always like, hey, focus in on something, you get a lot more from it. And it ended up becoming true, of course, right? The more time you spend on something, the more successful you'll be. And I feel like what I was trying to discover was like, what's the biggest thing that I can commit my whole life to, right? That I'll never be able to solve, right? Fully. And so what interests you about smart cities and the challenges of it, the problems of it? Is it because it's such a big thing that you probably can't get really too tired to, because it's all encompassing? What was fascinating about that the building market, right, of smart cities and the challenges that it comes with?
Yeah. So I think that has evolved over time. So I think when I first looked into it, I was kind of drawn, like everyone else, to the concept of a self-driving car, or, like you go in the building and it kind of recognizes who you are and all these things happen. It's like a smart home on steroids. But as I got into it, it was, you find out that there's no one definition of a smart city. There's like millions of things that make a city smart, right? Some very complex, some very simple, like the auto walk, right? That could be one part of it, but there are like, there's no one size fits all. thing that you call a smart city. There's no one size fits all problem or solution. There's a lot of different types of things. To do a smart city at scale is actually very complex from a technology perspective, right? But it involves a lot of different elements. You could think there's the data elements, the sensors, then there's the the connectivity, then there's the security, the analytics, right? So there's all these different things. But the exciting thing about it is there's no one in the world that can say they're an expert in the smart cities. Like you kind of early on, you look at a baseball analogy, we're not even in the first inning yet, right? We're probably just walking to the dugout, right? And so all the projects that you're seeing, these are just people's attempts at it, but it's at a very early attempt, right? So, that's what's kind of drawn me to it. There's just a lot of opportunity, and who's to say that we're doing it the wrong way, right? Because no one knows what the right way is, and those things are going to evolve over time. So that's kind of where we are now. It's kind of like many years ago when I was in college, my roommate came back. We're all engineers. He came back one day from class and he held up the textbook and says, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if I could take this textbook and go back in time, right? Then I'll have this coefficient named after me or this equation named after me. We'll be famous." But of course, we're looking at 200 years later. We know these formulas, we know these things. But back then, they were literally on the cutting edge creating this knowledge. And with smart cities, I feel that we're in the same stage. Right? We're creating this knowledge. All of us here, with our various levels of experience, we're creating that knowledge. It's not like the people before us created it and they know better than we do. They don't, right? They're still trying to figure it out, and they'll be figuring it out for years to come, right? So I think we're at a very ground floor opportunity. There's a lot of exciting challenges. It's a lot of it hasn't been discovered yet, right? So we're in this position where we're going to make things happen, right? So we're all pioneers at this point in time.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's a lot of definitions, right, of a smart city, and they're probably all true to some extent. And I'll give you my definition as a start, okay? And maybe, and I think the point is that there isn't a definition, right? But right. I'll give you a definition of what I think it is, right? From my broadest scope, and I'd like for you to kind of just share yours or confirm or pick at it or whatnot. What I see it as is digitization of infrastructure, right? And infrastructure can mean a variety of different things, right? It can mean physical infrastructure, whether it be transport. It could be programs and systems like public safety. It could be systems that, it's predominantly city government functions as a start because it's a marketable term to city governments and local governments. And then you see, people like your clients, over at San Mateo County, doing smart regions and so forth, right? But digitization of infrastructure, what's interesting about that is that I don't think it necessarily is limited to infrastructure of physical systems, but it could also be social infrastructure, right? And program infrastructure and service infrastructure, right? And that's kind of the space that PilotCity is in, is really connecting our citizens and having civically engaged, young people to be able to build communities of the future towards their future, and to be able to actually support the ecosystem and having families connected to each other as well, and utilizing services that that they may have in their digital or building digital environment, right? So that's how I've been not imposing as a definition for people, but how I'm seeing the direction of what I understand as smart cities, right? To define that niche of that greater effort and market. So very curious to know how SOT, strategy of things, is interpreting smart cities or smart regions and smart, X in your eyes.
So I think, when we first started, we were calling it Smart City, and we had an idea, similar to yours. Right? It's heavy use of technology, data, to create these types of events or outcomes. Over time, we've kind of changed our view a little bit, a lot. In fact, we're not using the term smart city as much. We're actually starting to use the term responsive city, right? So So you think about it, like, as residents in the cities that we live in today, what do we care about? Well, we care about this. We care about things like traffic. If I want to go to a store, I don't want to get stuck in traffic. If I walk outside my house, I shouldn't get hit by a car, right? Or in the age of COVID, I don't want to get sick, right, from going somewhere and getting exposed to COVID. So those are things that we care about. And so if a city wants to be relevant to us, wants us to live there, then they should create places that are safe for us to go, right? To have good schools, have jobs, right? So those things are uh, what we see as the responsibility of the city to create, right? Create these outcomes. Now, if a city is not doing that, then they're not responsive to our needs as citizens, as residents, right?
Mhm.
So really, a city's responsibility is to create those outcomes and be responsive to the needs of its citizens, of its businesses within its borders, visitors that come and visit. Right. So now a city can be responsive in a lot of different ways. Right? One is if they can pass a law that does certain things, right, that's responsive to their needs. That's what they'll do. If they could create new policies, right, to say everyone has to wear a face mask, right, when you go out into the supermarket, that's what they'll do, right? And if they have to use technology, then that's what they do. So a smart city is in some ways a responsive city. It just uses technology to create those outcomes. But the idea is you don't really have to use technology to create a responsive city, but technology is a player, an enabler of some of that. Now, you don't always have to use technology to do something. Right? You could, but you don't have to. Sometimes it could be changing a law. Sometimes it could be creating some policy. Sometimes it's whatever those things are. Right? So when we think of smart cities now, our thinking has kind of matured to the idea of uh, responsive cities, right? And how can technology be used to create this responsiveness, right? So that's kind of where we're thinking along the lines these days, right? That the ability to respond to an earthquake quickly, right? The ability to create these outcomes that we as citizens care about, right? And how fast they can do it. So that's really what a smart city should do. Right? It's just that we use technology, but we don't always have to use technology to create it. Technology is an enabler, but it's not the only thing. I think where we get excited is we get excited by technology, like I do. I get excited by technology, and sometimes you could use technology to create something where you don't have to use technology to create something. Right? So this is kind of where the smart city has to be smart enough to know when to use technology and when not to. Right? Or we as smart city creators have to kind of understand that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I do like the characterization of a responsive city because it's broader than just the idea of being. It's a generalized term that has broad scope. And at the end of the day, we're using a variety of different aspects, right? It could be technology responsiveness, it could be policymaker responsiveness, it could be a variety of different responsiveness. But the whole point is that there's constituents and residents and citizens within a particular jurisdiction, and they are relying on the government, they're relying on the infrastructure, they're relying on the system around them that their public tax dollars pay for, right, to be responsive to them, right, and what they need, right? So it's the ability to be better, more efficient, more effective, and be able to respond to citizen needs and demands, right? One thing that I forgot who was the guy that said it, but I think a guy from London at the Global City Teams Challenge conference, and he was talking about what is the purpose of a smart city, because there's the function of a smart city, right, where we're looking to create IoT, looking to create cybersecurity systems, looking to create services that are more engaging and optimize apps so that people can tell people when a pothole is there or when a couch is being illegally dumped, or smart streetlights to optimize this, the lighting systems, or auto walk or autonomous vehicles, right? There's all these factors and pieces. But what's the purpose of all that, right? And what he said was, it's based on data and equity. And what's really interesting about that purpose of a smart city And I think Portland does this very well because they've created a smart city framework that actually is purely based on equity. It's an equity-based smart city framework. But this idea of data equity, I really love because it's based on using data to be responsive and to understand the needs, right, of citizens and residents and so forth. And the whole idea is to then become a safety net so that all citizens, right, are able to elevate up to utilizing all these resources to reach their so-called Maslow hierarchy of needs, right, over time. So what do you think about that kind of utilitarian, this utilitarian aspect of the purpose of, toward data equity?
Well, I mean, it's when you think about the outcomes, right, of a city, and that's really how you should be looking at it. It's, the purpose of a city, smart or not, has to create outcomes. Right? Otherwise, we wouldn't want to live there. And so technology creates these outcomes, right? And one of the outcomes is, you call it quality of life, right? Quality of life, under quality of life, you would have outcomes in digital equity, in social equity, in economic equity, right? So now how do you reach that? So there are a lot of different ways. Right? You could pass laws, you could put policies to encourage job growth, bring in certain types of employers, but you could also use, data to inform the decisions that you make, the programs that you put in place, right? So in a way, he's right? But I wouldn't say that the outcome is necessarily what he says it is. Data is just a tool that allows you to create the programs that allow you to, or create the programs or the policies and services to drive, say, equity, right? To drive social equity or economic equity in this. So in some ways, technology is just a tool, an enabler, a capability that a city should have, right? And the ability to use those tools is very important, especially in this day and age.
And then it went to this extent where I think it was I don't know if you know Michael Dunaway. He works for the GCTC community, co-chair of the public safety group. But I don't know where he got this from, but it made a lot of sense when he was breaking it down, right? And what he's saying is that this infrastructure of smart cities and data and responsiveness and all these factors eventually boil down to trust, right? And what's interesting about the word trust is that it's a very powerful term. And when you think about trust and smart cities, it's not easily decipherable, right? You can't really understand why someone's saying trust is the most important aspect of a smart city or most important factor in a city in general or community, right? Or with a jurisdiction at least. But at the end of the day, it kind of makes some sense too, right? Because at the end of the day, there's people making decisions, that impact all residents, right? Or parts of residents, and they're typically elected officials and government staff. And so there needs to be a trust in the systems, the trust in the processes, the trust in what's being inputted into the system of governance and then outputted to services. People need to know that what's happening inside government needs to be a public process, right? That allows there to be trust built in. People need to trust that the government people are doing their job, right? And reflecting who they want to serve. And then they need to be outwardly kind of obvious, right, as well.
Right.
So how does, the work that you do, right, relate to that directionality as well?
Yeah. So it's interesting you brought that up, the whole concept of trust. Right. So we wrote a blog on this about a year and a half ago on this whole concept. So when people talk about trust in the context of a smart city, right now, the context automatically goes into cybersecurity or privacy, right? So that's kind of affiliated with trust, but trust goes a lot deeper, much deeper than that. It touched upon some of the things that you just mentioned here, right? And what Michael mentioned, right? And I'll start with an example, right? So all of us has been on an airplane, right? Now, would you fly in an airplane if it crashes 50% of the time? Right? No, right? Hell no, right? Right? How about 25%? Oh, no. How about 10%? No. 5%? No. Right? 1%? No. right? So why do people fly in the airplane? Right? Because they trust that it's safe, right? They feel that it's safe. And the way, and you look at it, at what that means. How do they try to crash proof the planes, right? Or flying? Well, you look at the airplanes itself, right? They have a lot of redundancies built in, right? They have use certain materials that have certain capabilities. They always, for example, you have two engines in a plane. Well, they're designed so that they can fly on one engine, right? Or you have four engines that fly on like two engines, right? So they've got all these redundancies built in so that it's safe in the design and the materials. Now, to get the parts for the airplane, well, they have to have a supply chain, right? They got to buy from manufacturers that's been vetted, that's been certified. They use certified materials. So there's a whole traceability of where even the raw materials come from. The mechanics that work on the planes, they had to go through annual certification. They have to always be trained, right? The pilots, they're always trained. The flight attendants, so they're trained on how to manage people and CPR and first aid and all these different things. There's regulators that regulate the industry to make sure that people are doing what they're saying they're doing. So up and down the entire chain, from the people who make the parts to the people who make the planes, to the engineers, to people who fly the planes, people who service the planes. Everybody's has gone through a process, right? So there's certification, so they know what they're working on, they know how to do it. Right? It's not easy to start your own airline, so there's all these laws and audits and processes in place. Right? So that what makes it's all those stuff combined to create trust, right? Trust that we would say, when I fly in a plane, I'm not going to die, right? Now you think about a smart city. Now, right? If you have a connected street light, for example, right? So a connected street light is really just a sensor that's on the light, and it tells you when the light is out, that it's like the bulb is broken and needs replacement. Now it has a little radio on it, so it sends it back to the like PG&E or utility company, so that they know, right? You could look at a dashboard and you say, oh, look, this light is out. Now, before we had connected street lights, the way the utility company would know that a light is out is someone would call in and complain, hey, look, the light on the street is out. Or they would send their inspectors and they drive the streets every 6 months. They go down, they look for broken street lights. So now that you have something that's connected, you know exactly when the light is out, right? But before that, it would be normal for a light to be out for 6 months or longer before it gets replaced, right? So no one knows about it. Now you have these connected street lights. Now you know about it, right? And so unfortunately, the processes from PG&E are such that it would still take them 6 months to replace it, right? Because they're not set up to respond to information that quickly. So let's just say they spend all this money to have a connected street light goes out. 6 months later, someone comes and fixes it, right? Well, they can't hide behind the excuse that they didn't know, right? Because they know right away when the light's out within a day, right? So if they connect the street lights on and no one fixes it in 6 months until 6 months later, well, where's the trust in that service, right? You don't trust that they're going to fix it. You don't trust that they know, right? So in some ways, technology, without changing the processes or the policies to go and get something done, right? Same thing with the auto walk or with the self-driving bus between the two schools, right? If no one trusts it, no one's going to use it, no matter how much the technology is there. And if the guy programming the bus, for example, right, or training the self-driving bus, he uses the wrong algorithm, and it doesn't take them to the right places, or it doesn't get the students there safely, well, no one's going to use it. There's no trust, right? Despite, so when we think of smart city, we still think of cybersecurity and privacy, but really we should trust the outcomes. You trust the people that have created the bus, or the outcomes, that created the processes, that they're certified, right? So really that whole concept is important. And that's why I think when you say this guy said trust is the most important thing. We agree, right? If the bus is always breaking down or the auto walk only works half the time, who's going to trust it, right? No one. Who's going to use it? No one, right? And so that's a big part of it. So at our company, when we look at some of these things, we try to also look in the issue of trust, right? Can you support this? Is this technology reliable? Is this something that's that's usable, right? Because you could come up with the latest cutting edge technologies, but sometimes they're not market ready, or they're not ready for the way the cities need for it to work, right? So cities think in terms of 10, 20-year life cycles, like the street light, right? or the traffic signal is there working for tens of years, right? New technology come and go. uh, what we don't want to do is put in new technology and then in 3 years it's outdated and no one uses it, or it can't keep up with the day to day, right? So in some ways, cities, uh, they the reason they're not always innovative is because they know they're based off the tried and true, right? It's been working for 20 years, it should work for another 20 years more, right? And so breaking in is kind of hard because it has to have the uptime to service the residents. It has to be reliable. It has to do all these different things. And there are a lot of different ways you could get there while having to spend it on this particular technology. So that's kind of the challenge that we go through. But that's also some of the things that we try to, in our work, try to look at it from that perspective. In fact, it's considered a failure if the residents don't use it. If they don't trust in the outcomes that it creates, it was unreliable. It's actually a failure, right? So when we work in smart city stuff, we also look at that from that perspective as well.
So what's ironic about trust in smart cities is that we're innovating to get to trust. And so it's an iterative process. So you have to go through distrust to get to trust, right? Because we need to become more responsive to the distrust because it's not a well-adopted technology. Maybe there's some issues with the Wi-Fi in a certain community and they can't access the service, or there's so many different aspects there, right? I want to actually diverse a conversation to SOT now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I like to have you just give us a baseline. SOT. I think people see you as like a consulting business, but really it's there's a directionality with where you're going. So give us a baseline on SOT and strategy of things. Okay. What are your products? What are your services? What have you done, so that people can understand? And then let's get into the project.
Sure. So we're an innovation company, right? And we and our tagline is we help cities become more safer, responsive, and resilient and smarter, right? And we do this through the application of science, of innovation, and of strategy, right? And we offer, we work around 4 offerings. One is advisory, right, which is the consulting part of it, but we're also part of doing a lot of work in knowledge creation and industry standards and innovation, right? So when you're working with some of these early stage products, there's no standards. So we're involved in helping define some of those processes or policies or even standards. And then we do research and what I call it, not research, but let's call it insights. We talk to a lot of people. We go to a lot of conferences, right? So we kind of see what's happening on the ground in real time as it happens, right? So when you're working in the area of innovation, things are changing so fast, right, that 6 months later, that the knowledge that you have could be outdated, right? So we like to keep current with all the things going on. So we have a unique view. And then finally, we, from the consulting, from the innovation work that we do, we want to go and create products and services that can be replicated, right? Whatever those services are. And that's really where we're headed, right? So you can create, you could use innovation to create products, and that's what we're doing. Now, if you look in the area of emerging technologies, a lot of that stuff is still being created right now, right? And so consulting is a way for us to kind of get our understanding of what are some of the challenges and problems are, work at some pretty cool projects. But really what we want to do is we want to productize those things that we learn from consulting and turn it into a product or service that can be replicated over and over again. So that's our baseline.
All right, cool. And maybe what you can do to kind of give Alec and Nick but also the audience who are watching this when they're in your program, is some examples of some of the work that you've done. So that way people can kind of have a characterization of the type of work you're doing, but then also some of the, and feel free to share some of the services that you'd like to start, doing, right? And products you'd like to start creating.
Sure. So I think when we got started, one of the things that we saw in smart cities is people were always struggling with, I want to be a smart city, but what do I do? Right. So we did some work around strategy and planning. Right. What is a smart city? How do I get there? What are some of the projects I should be doing? Where do I get funding? Where should I go first? So we put together this roadmap for some of our clients on helping them kind of get to that point, right? Start them on their journey to become a smart city. And then other projects we looked at some innovation projects, smart parking, right? Or the community-based air quality network, right? So it's a network of low-cost air quality sensors mounted on street poles across the county of San Mateo. Okay? And then we look at the data, and you could kind of make some determinations based on that, or make some actions. So, for example, on New Year's Eve, you could actually see, because people are lighting off fireworks, you could actually see the air quality sensors go up. Right? That this detects that. So those are some of the projects. We did another one with location analytics. So by turning on the location analytics capability, or routing some of the data that's collected from Wi-Fi access points, you could detect how many people are in a particular area. Right? Where did they start from? Where did they go to? Right? Just using the analytics collected from a Wi-Fi, a network of Wi-Fi access points. So that has a lot of good applications, right? That could provide, say, public safety, or for stores in the downtown area. I could give them an idea of where people are congregating and what they should be doing to drive traffic to other stores. So those are kind of example projects. We've also in the midst of doing one for the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the area of the Internet of Things. So the United States is looking at, and they recognize that IoT is the future. They're looking at where are the gaps for IoT now from a technology perspective. How do we close those gaps? Because we're looking at the IoT of the future, right? 10, 15, 20 years out. What are some of the things that the federal government should be investing in now in terms of research to close those gaps? Right. So that's kind of bigger picture research. They're trying to figure that out, right? Overcome some of those barriers. So we talked about the self-driving car. Well, the self-driving car relies on a network of high-speed connectivity, maybe low-cost sensors, maybe edge computing, all these different things, right? So where should the government be investing in now that private industry isn't? Right? And so we want to call that out so they can then start their planning, put in their policies to encourage R&D funding from the government, whether it's in the national labs or whether it's through grants to private industry. Okay, so that's a more forward-looking type project. That's another type of project we're working on. Finally, there's another one that we're working on now, and this is kind of a pretty interesting one. So last year, Derek, when we started with PilotCity, we talked about the idea of a safe space, right? And that was the idea of so when COVID hit last year, we kind of realized our smart city business was going to change overnight because all of a sudden city budgets were getting cut. People were no longer in downtown or in the office. So we asked the question: how can smart city technologies be used to create safe cities or safe buildings? Right? And that kind of morphed into the idea of a safe space. Right? And one of the things we're working on now and over the past year has really the idea of how do we get people back to work by creating these safe spaces? Like, can we, whether it's a combination of sensors or whatever these things are, right? How do we allow them to come back in the space and if they feel that it's safe to come back, right? And maybe it has certain things that prevent them or limit them from getting exposed, right? So what are those things? Right? So we took the idea of a smart city, we scale it down into an office, right? And even to a space within an office. How do we create the safe space? So we're about to launch, in fact, we have launched the an assessment tool, right? So it evaluates the safeness of a space by looking at the space itself, by looking at some of the measures that they put in place to protect and prevent exposure, to respond and recover a space from exposure, and then how do we build trust in the people that go to that space, right? So that they're willing to come back to work, come back to the office, come back to the gym, come back to school, right? So we created an assessment tool. That's the first step. The second step would be to create a prototype of a safe space, right? And this is where some of the technologies would come into play. So first part, launch the assessment, right, which is now done. We're trying to sell it. I think we may get a win from a city pretty soon, right? So, and we can do that. Then we start ourselves on a journey of creating safe spaces, safe buildings, right? Safe cities, right? So that's an outcome of a smart city, right? Can we create a safe city?
Yeah. Thank you for those examples. I mean, that helps a lot to characterize the exact type of work that you have done, right?
Mhm.
And the things that you're doing, and the types of things that you'd like to continue doing, and how it matures. So let's talk about how it evolves, right? So we're asking students, right? I'm just going to read this verbatim, okay, on our project here together with PilotCity students. We want students to design, code, and prototype a concept. And I would say it's probably design, code, or prototype a concept, right, of an online portal that helps manage and transform your hometown into an innovative and smart city. So this is an exciting project.
Right.
And we've talked about this in depth, where not every community is responsive. Not every community has all the trust in their government that they need.
Right.
Not every government has all the data that they have to make decisions that are optimized, that can move people towards trust. And not every city is necessarily equitable either, right? There's a lot of factors of where cities are not at right now when it comes to leveraging the new advancements of typically technology, but just solutions of now, right, in the future. And so SOT is coming in, right, with some strategies, with some ideas, with some thought processes, with some clients, and some projects under your wings, right, that you can offer, and some groups you're a part of. And so why is building an online portal for a city to start their journey and to build their journey important? And give us an idea of how that what you're imagining for that.
Right. So I would say if you look at how a city works, right, you've got a lot of departments. You got the police department, you've got the health department, you've got the operations, you've got parking, you've got the transportation, the libraries. All these they belong to different departments, but interesting enough, they don't talk to each other. Right. So you hear that term silos over and over again, right? There's different departments, they just don't talk to each other. So having a portal, for example, especially for something like a responsive city, it's a place where everybody can go to, right? It's not like they talk to themselves day to day, but having something out there, it drives someone to a single point. Right? And let's just say the project is on building a responsive city, right? So all of a sudden you have a single point where you're putting these various departments, they could come together to look for information, right? And for them, they may be seeing information from the other departments for the first time, right? But for this project, right? So this is a way to centralize some of that in a way. But second is, especially when it comes to measuring things, you can't fix what you can't measure, right? You can't improve on things that you can't measure, you don't know about, right? So, like on a crosswalk, right? If you knew how many accidents were people getting hit or near misses in a crosswalk in a certain intersection, well, you could see it and you could say, I'm going to focus my efforts on this because I could see that. Or the same thing on the bus that goes between the two schools, right? You can see how many students it carries, how long it takes, right? And based on some of those things that you measure, you could say, I need to fix that, right? Once you can measure it. Now, what you want to do is have something like even the metrics on a dashboard, right? Because now you could measure certain things and you can send them to a portal to look at it, right? And now they can go and start to collaborate, as an example, right? So there's that's some of the outcomes, some of the things we want to do. And maybe we put some information on there, accident reports, or maybe whatever those things are, right? That people can go and read. Or maybe you use that to collect information. You run a survey, you link the survey form from that portal, right? So it's a place that people can go, maybe as the cities that are the users of the smart or responsive city services, or maybe people like us, we create services for a city. We can go and we can find out, oh, here are some of the things that we could go and work on. Here are some of my challenges, or look, here's some statistics from the data that says this intersection is dangerous. Maybe this is a way for them to surface up problems, come up with solutions, encourage collaboration. And that's just, that I think a portal can mean a lot of different things, and that's what we're trying to surface up is, what is it that we want to use with it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that Y Combinator, the leading incubator that everyone knows about, talks. The founder Paul Graham has a famous essay called "Do Things That Don't Scale." And the relevancy of do things that don't scale on a consultancy level, right? Or let's just get in and solve the problem level, right? As opposed to, hey, let's try to figure out what this can do like worldwide, right? Allows for organizations to understand a specific problem and then to solve that unique circumstance, and then to iterate towards the process of discovering what there could be what are replicable aspects of this that can solve other problems with other cities and other organizations, other communities, right? And so what's interesting is that I see the direction, right, of SOT in the evolution, where you've got some of these projects under your belt that have really been exciting to see in fruition, especially in the market of smart cities. And then at some point now, you're getting enough information to decipher that there is a progression of valid programs and projects and considerations and adoptions and factors and national messages and all this stuff that fold in to be able to start to iterate towards a journey, right, that cities can take to get to where they could be potentially. And not every city, I think, is made the same. Metropolises, like San Francisco, are much different from, peripheral cities like San Leandro, very different from, say, city of Emeryville, to Fremont, to, and so everyone has their own journey. But there usually is a good entry point somewhere, right? There's a portal that you can get to, and you can get to the project one, or maybe option 1, 2, 3, and then you kind of take it and you kind of go on that path to make it happen. But at some point, there's a door, right? So people are taking the journey to take the first steps to the door, and by the time they get to the door, they open it, and then they're inside, and now they have data, right? Because they've executed on IoT projects like AutoWalk, like your East Palo Alto Wi-Fi connectivity projects, or your monitoring of the kind of the tracking of the Wi-Fi signals. And then they're in there, and now there's a network operations center, right? Now there's data on a dashboard, right, of their progress, of how they're advancing, how they're managing, how they're getting triggers and whatnot. So that's what I'm imagining based on the inspiration that you're sharing, right? And what you want students to do, right? You want them to create an online portal that allows someone who knows nothing about smart cities to be able to enter the doorway to say, I want to enter the portal and I want to dive into it. Then there's a series of educational resources, perhaps a programmatic path that kind of gets them through the door, to then open up the door, execute on some low-hanging fruit projects, and then be able to see live in action, right, the systems that they've innovated towards, in front of their eyes. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah, I think I think you've got the gist of it, right? So, and I think that even from our side, we don't always know exactly what that portal is. Like, what we kind of see is that there needs to be a place, right, where people can come in, right? They can see what are some of the things that are being worked on. There's a little bit of transparency in that. But even from, if you look at the types of users of this portal, right? One user group could be the city itself, right? They may say, I have certain problems. I'm going to put it out to this group that can access this portal, right? Or they could say, I put in this auto walk, and I want to see how effective that is. Right? And so, and from an operations perspective, I want to look at it day to day. And if all of a sudden the accident rates start to spike up, I may need to take action and do something else, improve on it, or whatever that is. Right? So that's another part of it. Then there are people like you and me, right? Where we could be the service creators. We could say, oh, they said they have these types of problems. Maybe I have something I could throw in my input, and maybe they'll do something with it, or whatever that is, right? So maybe we'll have access to the data. Maybe we'll have access to some parts of the dashboard, right? And then there are people that are solutions providers, and they say, a service provider says, I have some things that you should learn about, and here's some new products, here's some new things, whatever that is, whatever it looks like, and in this way, maybe the audit information gets distilled into a weekly report that someone just quickly scans and listens. Oh, here are some things that I have, whatever that is, right? And then they'll be aware of it, right? So that's a little bit of the concept of the portal. There's different users, right? There's different parts of the community they can participate. So we're going to kind of encourage participation, but in the beginning, we're not thinking too ambitiously. We're just thinking,
Yep.
let's on the things that they have, maybe we could do it a little bit better through this portal. Maybe we can consolidate it. Maybe we could provide information out there that instead of going to 20 different places for information, they could just get it in one place. Right? But we don't exactly know what that portal is, and that's what the project is, to kind of define that concept out a little bit more, and create a little bit of a mock-up to see, this we're in the right track, or no, we need to work on this area a little bit more, right? We need to kind of put our arms around it a little bit better.
Yeah, and there certainly is a big vision that can happen, but knowing the forms of bureaucracy that you probably work with and understand how government moves and so forth. Starting practical, right, is very important, so that it's solving a deep need at that moment, right? So when it comes to those deep needs, based on the Venn diagram of SOT, right, what you guys do, what you've done, right, and what you're seeing yourself do, and what you're seeing cities do, and then seeing what cities are and what they need and what they're ready for and so forth, putting those two Venn diagrams together to see what that practical focus is. What are they, right? What are the top 3, top 5 priorities of types of resources, dashboarding, monitoring systems, what departments, even what divisions, from the just top of your mind, what's the top 3 to 5 items that should be on this portal, right? So that students who are watching this, who are in the strategy of things, program, can be like, okay, so again, we don't want to limit the students, right? But give them some cookies to eat on, so they can start to kind of run on their hamster wheel.
Right. So I think one could be, an information portal, right? So that maybe let's just say let's look at the whole idea of COVID, right? So one thing that's happening now is all the guidelines are changing every so often, right? Every month it seems like the CDC is issuing new guidance, or Cal OSHA, right? Or the county health department is changing some things. So so you would have to go to 3 places to get that information, to find out what's going on. Now, on top of that, the industry associations like ASHRAE, which is I think it's the American Association.
I don't know what the acronym is either, but I know ASHRAE is.
American Society of Heating and Refrigeration something engineers, right? So they're the guys that kind of dictate how these ventilation systems work. Well, so ventilation is a big part has a big influence on the transmission of COVID in the workplace, right? So they're issuing out guidance every so often, right? So, so unless you're a facilities person, you wouldn't know to who ASHRAE is or the guidelines, but their guidance is very important, right? But even having the latest guidelines from them, in addition to the government on there, as a facilities manager for a city, you could look at those guidelines and say, oh, I need to make adjustments, right? As opposed to let's go to all these different places, but you don't always know when the latest guidelines have been issued. You don't always keep up with it, right? So this is just having consolidated information in one place, having the latest. Right? That's something that's of value for cities, right? To even do that. Right? The second part could be they could have some projects. Right? Let's just say a smart city project or a safe space project in this case. Right? So they should be able to, if they're running a pilot, they should be able to know the safeness of a particular space. Right? So they should be monitoring that. So that's a little bit of a dashboard. So that's another thing that could be inside this portal. Right. And maybe it's a place that they could also have a way to route problems to the larger city community or the community in general, right? So, these are some of the challenges that I have, and we're looking for innovative solutions, right? Even a call out for ideas is another thing that people could do. Right? So those are just kind of 3 ideas of sort of easy things that could be done. I wouldn't say easy, but practical things that can be done that's of immediate need, right? Information, dashboard, right? And then a way to share problems and that people can come together to collaborate and work on. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I would say, again, for the students who are watching this, to take what Benson's saying as a grain of salt, because if we have everyone developing the same things based on those top 3, right, then there won't be any differentiation of ideas and ideation and strategy and innovation to what he's saying. So I think really at the end of the day, those 3 things are maybe a requirement, but we really want them to be able to expand out and discover other features and functions and processes that this portal or this dashboard, this information kind of system in this kind of shareability social network scenario, right, are able, what that can do in addition, or other functions that maybe Benson's thinking about that are pertaining to your own community, your own city, your own county, that you're noticing. Because that's really what the value is tapping into your brain, your understanding of your own communities and saying, okay, what Benson's saying is this, but I'm seeing this, and I don't see the need for, a dashboard right now because we just got to get them in the door, right? Or maybe there is a lot of problems and there's a lack of connection to each other with the shareability aspect, or maybe there's something completely different and off, right? That's kind of like, that maybe pertain specifically to that community culture. Maybe there is like a model where every city can build their own dashboard. They can build their own portal. Right. They can share that with their constituents. Maybe it is where the open data portal sits, where the government puts in their data. There could be a variety of different ways you can format this. Again, with the prioritization or consideration, right, of what Benson's saying.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point. I think that I would say I encourage everyone to kind of, think big. Right? Because this is a journey, and we'll start with something that's kind of practical, because people love what they understand today, right? So they buy what they understand today, they understand it. But the things that you might be thinking out might be 10, 15 years out, and that's a vision, and that's something that we have to build to. But we welcome those ideas as well, right? Because it's a little bit of a roadmap. It's a journey. You start from square one, but you may end up in square 64, right? And there's something further down the road. And I think the kind of imagine too is that, think about who the users are, right? So the people today that we design it for may not be the users of tomorrow, right? Or they may evolve and adapt to become those users of tomorrow. So just because they may not be able to do it now doesn't mean that they won't in the future. And that's the whole idea of setting this vision of where we want to be, right? So we're trying to create this prototype. This prototype should have this at the end of this never-ending journey. This is what it should look like. But what it starts with today is very different. But it's like Derek says, you got to get people into the portal. Once they're in the portal, they'll know, ask, hey, how come this isn't here? Hey, Well, that's an idea that you could put in. That's a feature, right? So you got to play the game. You got to get in the game. Right? To get them in the game, where to get them into the portal.
Chicken and eggs. So there's some designing, there's some coding, there's some prototyping. Maybe there is no coding. Maybe it's just prototyping. Maybe it's a Weebly website. Maybe it's a Wix website. Maybe it's just a sketch, right? I mean, I think the point is that we want you to be motivated to kind of learn some concepts to kind of, it's really your ideas at the end of the day, right? But applying your technical skills on top of that. And you're creating this kind of online portal, however you're defining it. And then it's helping your hometown or your city that you're living in, right? To manage and transform their journey, right? So when it comes to the approach of having them approach their hometown or their city or their jurisdictions which they live, how would you encourage them to gain insight from their own community and city and to develop this portal? You know, how would you have them start? Like, should they start by should they really be designing a portal for their own hometown? That way you guys get data and understanding of what the opportunities are and specific to that community, or should it be a generalized online portal that's for anybody, but it's for their hometown too? You know, how would you approach that? And how would you, what buckets, what places, what people, what websites should they go to learn more about that specific jurisdiction and what information you guys are looking for, right?
Yeah. So I think it's I would say you don't necessarily need to think about designing it for everyone, right? Just design it for your hometown or the city that you're interested in, right? And then over time, some of those things become common to all cities, and you turn that into a feature. But you start custom, start with your own city, and which may look very different than the needs of my city or Derek's city, right? But I would say start from that. Right? That's your starting point. Take a look at the city's website. How are they announcing things? How are they sharing information, right? And generally not very well, right? Because it's largely informational, but it's not interactive. It's and it's probably not done the way that we're thinking about it, right? So I would say that'd be a starting point. I would also go and start talking with some people in the city, right? Maybe usually there's a community engagement group. Hopefully, within some cities, they have someone that's public facing, whether it's public affairs, whether it's the community engagement. So they can also tell you, how do they interact, right, with their residents. Right? So that's to the residents. Now, from an operations perspective, right, who are some of the how does the people inside the city communicate? How do they get their information? And that it may be someone in operations internally, right? Whoever that person is. It could be out of the city manager's office, for example. It could be public works, right? So, talk to someone in those groups and understand, where they're getting information, how they're reporting it. Sometimes the website team is also good. They may have some kind of portal or existing. So that's another place to start as well. Just to get an idea of, what are their design requirements? What have people been asking for, right? What people ask for and what they actually implement are two different things, right? But what are they asking for? That quickly gives you an idea without having to do too much work. Right? Because usually what happens is on the website, they talk to the website team, right? And sometimes the website team works on both the internal website and the external website. So they get a lot of these requests, right? So what are those requests, right? And so I think that would give you an idea of that. So it's community facing, it's inside facing, right? So those are your two groups. And then there are three, the website team kind of spans between the two worlds, right? The website team is the implementation of some of those requests. If you think about that from that perspective.
And this is great that you're breaking down the hierarchy or the division departments within a city government for where you can engage. And my 2 cents on that is the website team would be with the IT department typically, right? So that's what you can look up: IT department, public works, city manager's office. City managers typically run the city, right? Unless it's a strong mayor, right?
Right.
And also there's elected officials, right? So reach out to an elected official in your district that you live in, and a council member basically, or the mayor itself, and say, hey, craft a pitch, craft an idea, get strategic with what you want to ask them, but maybe you're digging information from actual people. And I would say that the biggest value, right, of this project, Benson, would be to design and prototype and code an online portal that gets into that point, but the sales side too, right? Or the marketing side, or the engagement side, or the user feedback side. So
Right.
highly encouraged, whoever is watching this, who's in your program right now, to get that party started, get some general brainstorms and some pitches, together on the program, and what the development you're making for strategy things, and then quickly understand it for yourself to then be able to engage those people immediately, right? Because relationships take a long time to build. You may have to send a few follow-up emails, to get their attention, and at some point you want an actual effective solution, right, to communicate, right? And you can and we always tell people that the function of Pod City essentially is to present a bunch of puppy dog eyes, right, to older people. So when you have these kids coming up saying, hey, can you please help me with my school project, right, you typically get a little more traction. So you can all utilize that you're a student as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that always helps. And I think the interesting thing here is, I think the students bring a lot of different viewpoints to this, right? Because I think that, in some ways we're all comfortable with technology, but a lot of you have grown up with technology, right? Whereas I think for us, we have to learn the technology as it was developed. And so that's a very different use of technology. And as you think about that user experience, right, that's very critical, right? In designing and making a portal useful. Right? You think about in a city, who the users are. Well, you've got people that don't speak English, right? You've got people that maybe they're old and they're visually impaired, right? So they can't really see, right? So so you can't put a lot of small words, right? But you can't do big words because you run out of space, right? So how do you represent some of those things, right? Then you've got people that, think about it, they don't really have connectivity. So how are they going to get this information? They may have to go to a kiosk somewhere. Right? And so now you got to make it very easy for them because maybe they're not very good with technology, right? Then you've got people that, maybe they work 2 jobs, right? And they're looking at this information after an 18-hour day, right? So they got to be able to find it easy, right? And so in some ways, the user experience is probably one of the most important things that you can do. In fact, most people don't do a good job of that, right? Most products out there in the marketplace are unusable because it's too hard to use, right? Because it doesn't account for that. Now, the city is responsible for making sure that its services are available to everybody, making sure that they can engage everybody, right? And so when you think about a portal, we're to think about the user's perspective as well, right? Can this be in a way that can be used by as many people as possible? Can be inclusive, right? So that's another. So the whole design experience, the user experience in user interfaces is very critical, right? So for example, like in your auto walk, right? So if you go to places like if someone is blind, they hear this beeping signal at an intersection, at a traffic signal, right? So they know when it's safe to walk, for example, right? So, or you look at the traffic signal itself. There's a little person walking, right? There's a hand that says stop, right? So those are universal things. So because not everyone understands English, right? So they put walk, they may not know what walk means. Well, hopefully they do, but you can't count on that. So when we think about the user experience, we're designing for that, right? And that's where some of the innovation is as well. Okay, so not just the type of things in there, but how do people use this portal, right? So that's innovative. You think about it. Someone say, "Oh, well, I can make it available on the iPhone," or, "Well, not everyone has a smartphone, right?" There are some people that they can't afford it, or they're 5 years old, right? They don't have a phone, right? Not yet, anyway. And so you got to think about some of those types of things as we design a portal, right? So, and that's where a lot of innovation is going to come in from as well. I don't think we've done a good job in general of designing for the user or the user experience. And there's a lot of innovation. You think about the Apple iPhone, uh, you look at the user experience of that, that's incredible, right? It's very simple. And a lot of innovation is in this case, in the user experience. So you think about innovation, and this is why I challenge everyone. Don't think of innovation as technology, because that's where we typically think of innovation, right? But innovation can be in the area of technology, of course, in terms of the product, in terms of the service. It could be a service innovation, how that that service is delivered, right? It could be in the user experience, which I think no one really thinks about, right? So those are, I guess that's the customer experience, right? So that's, you can innovate in that, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can innovate as you're looking at this project or considering this project. We encourage you to kind of look at that. You're not necessarily always coding, but maybe you're coding an experience or you're designing an experience, right? That's innovation as well.
Well, that's a great segue to start taking some questions from, I'm sure Alec, I'm sure Nick, you guys are spinning your minds the whole time and patiently absorbing everything. So Alec, you got some questions, some thoughts, some perspectives?
Yeah. So Benson, you were talking about kind of like finding innovation through technology. And, when we were testing out our product, like one of the main things that you use for testing to see if like a user experience is good with a hardware product is like using your left hand, like it's like the oiled up left hand thing, where you have to try to use something with your left hand and you have to kind of like challenge yourself to be able to use something to kind of see if it's actually usable. And the question I had for you is like, what types of ways can you kind of simulate that same experience when you're dealing with something like technology where it's a user interface? Like, is there like an easy way to kind of test that to see if you can kind of put yourself in a position where you would be challenged to use the interface?
Yeah, what I would do, because let's just say you're the designer of the interface. Well, you're working with it on a day-to-day basis. So you're not a good judge of that. What I would do is I would take it to someone, your girlfriend, your parents, someone that's outside the loop of what you're doing, and they're seeing it for the first time. Right? What is their reaction? How do they react to it? Can they use it easily? Right? Or they say, "Oh, this doesn't make sense. Why did you do this step here?" Right? So that's a good data point. And as you improve on that, then you take it to maybe someone that's another community that maybe they're disabled, right? And so maybe they're using it a certain way, right? Get their input. So that's another way. So you take it to these different groups, right? So although in the beginning we could give requirements, those requirements are not specific enough, right? We need feedback from actual users. So you go out there, reach out to someone who hasn't seen it or seen it for the first time, right? Get their feedback, and then incorporate that, and then do it again. Then take it to another group that hasn't seen it, right? Another target demographic that could be another target user, right? And keep doing that. So that would be the way I would do it. And because we all have assumptions of what we think it is, right? But we should challenge those assumptions. We should ask someone that's not involved, that's an actual user that can give you that feedback. And sometimes that feedback may be counterintuitive, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Follow-ups, Alec?
Another question I had is like kind of developing off of that. When you're looking for people to kind of test on it, is it better to kind of take like say a test group of one person and just kind of watch them use it, or would it be better to kind of like step back, almost like when they have like the like one-way mirror, and just kind of see how they do, like how they deal with the program by themselves without trying to direct them in any way? Like, is it better to just kind of like give them the program, kind of almost step out of the room, or just kind of like step back and kind of watch and see how they're doing it? Or would it be better to kind of have a little bit of talking to them in a little bit?
So I think it's going to be a little bit of both, right? Maybe in the beginning, you probably don't have enough. And so you probably have to sit there with them and, and ask questions. Right? If you had this, what would you do? Would you create a little mock-up of a website, or do it on a PowerPoint and mock up what a live site can be? Right? And so you could use that. And then just as they go through it, you ask them, what are you thinking here? Or, why'd you go there, or how does this feel? Right? And as it gets a little bit more mature, then and you have enough, then you step back and maybe let them see how they react to it. Right. So it's gonna be a combination of both. And then there'll be people that they'll just need more hand holding than others because they may be going down a certain direction. You want to lead them back, right? So I think it's as you go do these, you'll figure out which ones to do. But in the beginning, my guess in the beginning is that you'll have to be there, and you have to give them a little guidance, ask questions. But that's okay. That's just part of the whole data gathering process as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we're good. Nick, are you good on questions? Oh, he's in school right now. Multitasker.
Strategy of things. But no, I'm good on questions right now. Thank you for coming out and talking to us. It was actually very helpful, especially like where to start and everything. Try not to pile up with a lot of stuff, kind of just stay focused on certain things. But yeah, thank you for coming out.
Yeah, no.
See, this is a smart city. A kid in school while job shadowing with a employer and a podcast, right? I guess that's the definition.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are good, Benson.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing details today. I'm going to hold you back for a little bit. Alec and Casey, feel free to. I'm sorry, I keep calling Alec and Casey. I just see you two. It's his business partner. I see them together. But Alec and Nick, feel free to stick around if you want to check out some behind the scenes stuff. We'll just be talking about our vlogging. But that's about it. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for co-hosting, Alec. Thanks for co-hosting, Nick, as always, and Benson. We'll see you on the flip side.